Hello! Olá, meus amores. Hello, people today. People today. People today. Quero ver afinal o que é isto. Eu ia começar a ver este vídeo de manhã, mas depois comecei a jogar.
For a generation of YouTube fans, MrBeast has become an almost mythical figure. An ordinary guy creating extraordinary spectacles out of sometimes strangely ordinary topics, from counting to 100,000 to playing tag and hide and seek, and all for eye-watering cash prizes. He's buried himself alive, recreated Squid Games and given away a desert island. He's known for giving those big prizes, cash, houses, cars and food to friends, strangers and as philanthropy, and he's built a channel with 90 million subscribers, in doing so earning around 54 million a year according to Forbes. He started a nationwide burger chain, been on Jimmy Kimmel, Joe Rogan, employs over 100 people and has been at the forefront of some of the biggest philanthropic campaigns on YouTube.
But MrBeast is part of a larger story. The story of American capitalism, corporate profits and politics. The story of American mythology. It's a story that takes some surprising turns, one in which a complacent media has neglected to follow the money. A story with a narrative that's been shaped, twisted and manipulated by corporations like Coca-Cola, monolith chemical and shipping companies, international meat monopolies and the deep pockets of big oil. It's a shadowy story of injured workers, low wages, shady deals, collusion, pollution, bribery and even suicides.
What we can see through MrBeast is not speculation, but a perfect postmodern example of how capitalist mythology is manufactured, how it hangs together and shapes all of our lives.
So before we get to MrBeast's philanthropy, we have to do some important groundwork. To make some progress in unravelling the problem, we have to understand the roots of this much wider trend, maybe the most worrying trend of our time.
Because propaganda, lobbying, advertising, public relations and the ideological weapons used by big business have become so expertly proficient in obfuscation, run so deeply through back channels to avoid regulation, is so entangled in our culture with philanthropy, education, with the media, that big business can make perfect use out of an affable, generous, seemingly decent and well-meaning figure like MrBeast.
What's interesting with prodigious figures like MrBeast is not how they manage to do what they do, but what they tell us about the culture that gave rise to them in the first place. What can MrBeast's success, his approach to business and philanthropy and YouTube and entertainment and sponsorship tell us about American culture, capitalist culture?
Uh-oh.
Western culture,
It's all my
and
fault.
even more about ourselves.
Ia pá, isto é grande shit talk no MrBeast. Is MrBeast actually a killer?
Every civilization has its myths. Rome
Every civilization
had
has a
Romulus
serial
and
killer
Remus.
called
Ancient
MrBeast.
Greece had Zeus and Achilles.
MrBeast is the worst person in the
India
world.
has Brahma and Vishnu. The British Empire had great explorers and civilizers. And myths all have a function, purpose, a use in society. They all support a narrative about the culture that created them. What is America's myth?
Doesn't matter.
I want to
Anything
start
matters,
with a
right?
quick story. Everyone's heard of Davy Crockett, the ordinary
Tunis,
woodsman, the wild king frontiersman, the self-made hero
guess that's good.
of the American West. He was well known across the country in plays and short stories for his larger-than-life mythical adventures. When the French writer Alexis de Tocqueville toured around America in the wake of its revolution to try to understand what was distinctive about American life, he noted, 2 years ago, the inhabitants of the district of which Memphis is the capital sent to the House of Representatives in Congress an individual named Davy Crockett, who has no education, can read with difficulty, has no property, no fixed residence, but passes his life hunting, selling his game to live, and dwelling continuously in the woods. His competitor, a man of wealth and talent, failed. In Europe, a rise to notoriety from such humble, self-made beginnings was impossible. American culture turned Crockett into a legend. A popular song described him as half horse, half alligator. One man wrote, "You have heard of the celebrated Loco Crockett, who can whip his weight in wildcats, jump up higher, fall down lower, and drink more liquors than any man in the state. He is returned now, a very gentle and respectable man." Crockett's meteoric rise became mythical because it seemed to come from nowhere. But as the historian M.J. Heal has noted, this isn't strictly true. Crockett's image was actually carefully crafted by politicians and publishers who believed his image would be useful for their cause. Libertarianism on the frontier.
You think that's what's
The
happening with
idea
Mr.
of a
Beast?
frontiersman out there on his own, independent, self-reliant, with no need for federal assistance or elite rule was important to the image of democracy that Jacksonian Democrats were trying to sustain in 19th century America. Jacksonians wanted to expand suffrage to the ordinary man, and in Davy Crockett they saw a compelling narrative that would help them achieve this and win the public image battle. And while he was of course real, Davy Crockett became a mythical figure for this reason. He was exaggerated, used, crafted, memorialized, manipulated, and proliferated for political, economic, social, and cultural reasons. Tocqueville noticed this. Crockett fit in with the image of the American out there alone, apt to imagine that their whole destiny is in their own hands. Heal remarked that, realizing the imaginative power of the West, political managers sought to touch responsive chords in the electorate by finding and fashioning political heroes from beyond the Appalachians.
Davy Crockett was one of the first examples of something we love in democratic societies. Underdog stories, adventurers, a self-made man, a man of the people. But stories can be used and misused, appropriated and twisted, reimagined and rewritten in calculative and disingenuous ways.
Mr. Beast is a likeable guy. He's the guy next door. He's the carefree guy having carefree fun with his group of friends. He's ordinary, but he does extraordinary things. What if I filled my friend's house with slime? What if anything you could place in this circle you can keep? What if we went to the Bermuda Triangle? He's also become well known as a generous philanthropist. He's given homeless people homes and $10,000 in cash. He's tipped waitresses $30,000 and given away houses to delivery drivers that turn up at them. Team Trees has organised YouTubers to fundraise to plant 20 million trees, and more recently, Team Seas has done the same to remove 40 million kilograms of trash from the ocean. He's even started a second channel, Beast Philanthropy, where he's given away 10,000 turkeys at Thanksgiving, helped after a hurricane, and set up his own food bank.
And before we move on, it's really important to say this. This is obviously commendable stuff. This video is not an attack on Mr. Beast's
Of course it is, you
personal
fucking
morals.
asshole.
It's not a question of whether he's a good person or not. I don't know him. He seems like a nice, generous, hard-working guy who's built a hugely impressive YouTube channel and probably just wants to use his influence to do some good in the world. But because he's so influential, because he's successful enough to be close to some significant organisations, non-profit and for-profit, looking at Mr. Beast can tell us a lot about some of the trends he's part of and ultimately benefits from himself.
So let's have a look at some of these giveaways and philanthropic efforts. First, the most obvious thing to note is that Mr. Beast runs a business, a very, very successful one. Jimmy has said openly that the motivation for these giveaways comes from two places. First, he says it is business. They attract views, they make profit. He wants to be the most successful YouTuber in the world, and he's succeeded.
Just kept going and reinvesting, and then I tipped pizza delivery people $100, and then I tipped a homeless man 10 grand, and then, you know, gave away cars, gave away houses, and last hand take hand off $1 million keeps it, and basically the entire time. So like for the last like 8 or 9 years, like every dollar I've made, I just spent it the next month on content, and I just did that every single month, and it just kept getting bigger and bigger, and here we are.
But second, he feels good about doing it. He likes helping people. Let's take a quick look at this first motivation before returning to the second later. Every MrBeast video that involves a giveaway of some kind, whether to a friend, a stranger, a homeless person, is paid for by a sponsor. It's a kind of for-profit philanthropy, or what economist Matthew Bishop coined in 2006 as philanthrocapitalism. Bishop writes that philanthrocapitalism encompasses not just the application of modern business techniques to giving, but also the effort by a new generation of entrepreneurial philanthropists and business leaders to drive social and environmental progress by changing how business and government operate. Philanthrocapitalism has become something of a buzzword over the last few years. It has several features and is broad enough to vary in meaning and scope depending on who you ask and how you look at it, but essentially it's come to mean treating philanthropy as a business, using traditional business methods like a focus on efficiency for philanthropic projects, or expecting a return on an investment in some way or another. The merging of business and philanthropy and the involvement of powerful individuals in philanthropic efforts has become a frequent talking point in recent years, with the rise of institutions like the Gates Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, and phenomena like fair trade. Gates has convinced fellow billionaires like Warren Buffett and Mark Zuckerberg to pledge to donate their fortunes to philanthropic efforts. And Mr. Beast has become something of a philanthrocapitalist himself, turning giveaways into advertising revenue, food drives into profitable entertainment, and homelessness into a kind of spectacle that pays.
Now, at its best, philanthrocapitalism does some important work. Gates himself has spent considerable resources and effort vaccinating, feeding and helping significant numbers of impoverished people all around the world. But as several authors have pointed out, as we'll see, some of the trends
You guys believe this shit?
only have a
I'm
darker
joking.
side
I'm joking.
that could actually be doing more harm than good. At its worst, as we'll discover, philanthrocapitalism allows sponsors, donors and big business to whitewash, greenwash and conceal or draw attention away from their otherwise questionable business tactics and propagandise positive spin and public relations to combat disturbing trends that they themselves created and perpetuate.
In this way, figures like Mr. Beast can sometimes end up spreading corporate messages, believing that they're doing good and sometimes contributing to even more harm. Mr. Beast's sponsors
E você era
vary.
caçado por gonas.
Some,
What the
like
fuck?
Skillshare, could be categorized as simple advertisers, exchanging a fee
I'm in the
for
middle
a
of a
short
battle?
promotional section of a video like this one. There's no claim of philanthropy from the sponsor, and Mr. Beast uses the money to finance the stunt
He's too
or
fast.
the giveaway. In
He's
other
dead.
videos, though, as we'll see, the promotion doesn't seem to be the primary objective of the sponsor.
But to understand this trend, we need to quickly look at how philanthropy capitalism became a central part of capitalist culture before exploring some of the ways we can identify the damage the trend does today and
These guys are
how
kinda
the
weak.
Beast has participated in those harms and
What if
how
I die?
YouTube is becoming fertile ground for a disturbing trend.
Eu também tenho weapons, fixe, mas...
The late 19th century
honest,
was
não
the
são tão
gilded age
fixe.
of American capitalism, an era known for greed, corruption, exploitation, and the spread of industrialization and wealth across America. It saw the creation of vast new monopolies in railroads, oil, steel, banking, and media
Deve ser
by
o
now
dono da
household
fragate.
names like Andrew Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and
Don,
John D. Rockefeller.
commander or whatever.
These figures came to be labelled
Captain.
as the robber barons because of their tendency to employ oppressive, harsh business tactics, exploiting their workers, and bribing local and national politicians to amass vast
Where's the
fortunes
freighter?
never before seen in America.
There you go.
The robber barons have a mixed legacy. As historian Richard White writes, they've had a contradictory reputation, at first standing for a gilded age of corruption, monopoly, and rampant individualism. Their corporations were the octopus, devouring all in its path. Later, though, they were
I
interpreted
don't know what
as
any of these means.
entrepreneurs, necessary business revolutionaries, ruthlessly changing existing practices and demonstrating
any of
the
these
protean
mean?
nature of
is he
American
talking
capitalism.
About? What is he talking about?
But I want to focus
What's his
quickly
deal?
on a particular trend the robber barons have become known for, their philanthropy.
Take Andrew Carnegie, the Scottish-American industrialist who built a vast steel and railroad empire across America. He gave most of his vast $500,000 fortune to charity over the course of his later life, and at the time of his death was left with around $30 million. Carnegie was the forerunner to the new capitalist philanthropist model, writing an article, The Gospel of Wealth, to urge capitalists to use their newfound fortunes for good. He wrote that the millionaire will be but a trustee of the poor, entrusted for a season with a great part of the increased wealth of the community, but administering it for the community far better than it could or would have done itself. The wealthy paternalist could dispense with their wealth in a responsible way, building libraries while discouraging, quote, the slothful, the drunken, the unworthy. And
Yeah,
while
meu,
Carnegie
não
was
fazer
building
bordéis,
libraries
fazer
and donating to
bibliotecas.
churches and universities on the one hand,
Sounds
he was
good to me.
ruthlessly expanding, paying politicians bribes and subjecting his employees to grim working conditions and paying them just above the poverty line. One worker said that you don't notice any old men here. The long hours, the strain, the sudden changes of temperature use a man up. Sociologist John A. Fitch said that the conditions led to old age at 40. Workers worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, with just one holiday, the 4th of July. And Carnegie's philanthropic turn came after one of the most brutal labour disputes in American history. In 1892, workers were striking at Homestead in Pennsylvania in response to a pay cut. A battle broke out between Carnegie's men and the striking workers, and eventually 8,000 National Guardsmen were sent in to quell the strike. At least 10 men were killed in the fighting. After the strike was over, Carnegie was sent a telegram by his chairman, Henry Frick, Victory, it said. Carnegie replied, cables received. First happy morning since July. Congratulate all around. And Frick then responded with, our victory is now complete and most gratifying. Do not think we will have any serious labour trouble again. But Homestead had turned the public against Carnegie, and later, in a letter, he complained that, quote, the mass of public sentiment is not with us about Homestead on the direct issue of readjustment of the wage scale. People did not understand it, but I observed that opinion was greatly impressed by the few acts of kindness. Carnegie knew that there was more than one way to tip the balance of public opinion, and he knew how important public opinion was for doing business. So while his philanthropic efforts ramped up in the following years, it did so at the expense of his some 40,000 workers. Historians have shown that while the value of Carnegie's goods more than doubled over the years following the strike, the wages of his men were cut by 67%. Carnegie had discovered that when it came to profits, public opinion was as important as bribery and wage cuts. And he's probably the most notable example of a trend that became widespread. Around the same time, the oil baron John D. Rockefeller was also giving away large sums while simultaneously crushing workers' strikes. In 1914, strikers at Ludlow were gunned down by the National Guard. At least 25 died, including women and children. Rockefeller congratulated the National Guard for, quote, fighting the good fight, which is not only in the interests of your own company, but of other companies in Colorado and the business interests of the entire country and labouring classes quite as much. Rockefeller threatened his competitors and chaired secret meetings to monopolise the market and drive up prices. Corporations like Rockefeller's Standard Oil and Carnegie Steel became so powerful that in 1890 Congress passed an antitrust act to weaken the robber barons and break up their monopolies, prohibiting anti-competitive practices, including artificially raising prices. Senator John Sherman, who the act was named after, said that if we will not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation and sale of any of the necessaries of life. In an inquiry, the lawyer Frank Walsh said that it's been stated many times that it might be better for people controlling very large industries, instead of devoting the excess profits to the dispensation of money along philanthropic lines, that they should organise some system by which they could distribute it in wages first, or give to the workers a greater share of the productivity of industry in the first place. In 1911, the Supreme Court split Rockefeller's Standard Oil into 36 smaller companies, including Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron.
Today, we all know that PR and image is as important as reality. The most savvy public figures curate a kind of mythical figure around themselves, and we can see this phenomenon everywhere.
Domino's, for example, recently donated $100,000 to small businesses in a Support Local campaign, but then spent $50 million on a marketing campaign making sure that everyone knew about it. And recently, Volkswagen have championed their philanthropic donations to a variety of causes, including beach preservation, while simultaneously designing low-emission vehicles that were rigged to cheat emissions tests.
This phenomenon is so widespread, it's difficult to choose which examples to pick. And even more worrying, many of these philanthropic contributions end up running through foundations like the Gates Foundation, which, as scholars like sociologist Lindsay McGooey and Professor of Law Gary Jenkins have argued, have a host of problems that are caught up in this logic of charity in exchange for influence and good PR.
McGooey argues that the Gates Foundation is paternalistic, ignores grantees' concerns about their approach, focuses too much on vanity projects, and often favours reducing regulations in developing countries. Furthermore, McGooey writes that study after study has proven that only a small percentage of charitable donations from wealthy donors reach poor individuals. Most of it tends to go to alma maters or cultural institutions frequented by the wealthy. The rich also gives less of their incomes proportionately than the poor do. In fact, the number of private charitable foundations have skyrocketed in recent years. About 5,000 are set up every year, despite charitable giving in the US being steady at about 2% of GDP.
What explains this? Well, as inequality increases and wages stagnate and billionaires amass pools of wealth so vast it would make Carnegie and Rockefeller's eyes water, what better way to spend that money than on PR and influence that avoids regulation? It's not as crass and transparent as traditional advertising and comes with tax breaks. In this context, of course, whitewashing, greenwashing and now pinkwashing are everywhere.
Bruh, very cynical.
Take this startling fact. One study in 2012 found that just 7% of donations reached causes that could be defined as a benefit to the average in-need person. Another study found that 55% of grants went to large organisations with budgets over $5 million already. In other words,
Are you for real?
most donations went to religious or cultural foundations like churches, institutions and museums and galleries, which are much more likely to be frequented by the wealthy associates of the wealthy and, let's face it, whiter donors who might get a shiny plaque under some modern art piece but are a bit less likely to help individuals who probably just need a few decent meals and some better wages.
The French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called the participation in this kind of activity the accumulation of symbolic capital. That was good deeds, connections and support for institutions that buy you public prestige, power and influence.
And this trend over the last few decades has coincided with the loosening of regulation, the rolling back of labour laws and the decline of average salaries and an increase in inequality across the world.
As Carl Rhodes and Peter Bloom write in The Guardian, what we're witnessing is the transfer of responsibility for public goods and services from democratic institutions to the wealthy to be administered by an executive class.
All of this begs an important question. Where's the line between philanthropy and self-interest, between doing good and looking good? What happens when philanthropy becomes a spectacle for distraction?
Much of Mr. Beast's reputation centres around his philanthropy. Media outlets like the Associated Press, Looper and The Independent praise Mr. Beast uncritically, reporting that he's, quote, rethinking old notions of philanthropy and describing him as YouTube's biggest philanthropist. Scan a few comments, listen to a few podcasts, watch a few interviews, and you'll get the impression that Mr. Beast is seen as a generous, selfless, heroic philanthropist. And again, this is certainly not to take away from all the good Mr. Beast does, the effort he puts in and his intentions. I think he genuinely cares, he has fun, and he has a huge audience that he's hopefully inspiring to go out and do some good in the world themselves. I want to draw attention though to something else, the wider trend, the problems that arise from this format. the money behind it, and the motivations of some of the people that support the content. Let's start here. In November 2021, MrBeast and the team spent the day giving away 10,000 turkeys at a food drive in Greenville, North Carolina. The video has almost 6 million views. The 10,000 turkeys, worth $250,000, were donated by Genio, who got credited throughout the video and in the description.
In case you're wondering how we got 10,000 turkeys to give away, they all actually came from Genio. And the crazy thing is, this is their largest donation ever. Last year, they donated over 400,000 pounds of turkeys to people in need. Like this. Where'd you get that from? I found it. That's not fake?
This oven-ready turkey from Genio?
Did they tell you to say that?
They did. They gave me $3 and a turkey. They're also pre-seasoned.
And more importantly, they gave us 10,000 turkeys to give away at this food drive, so I forbid you from buying a turkey from any other brand for this Thanksgiving.
This is the Thanksgiving turkey now.
Obviously, we couldn't have done it without them.
Of course, while a $250,000 donation sounds like, and in some ways is, a lot of money, it's a small figure for a company whose parent company, the food conglomerate Hormel Foods, is worth $27 billion. $250,000 is around the same price a company like this might pay for a television commercial that would be shorter, more direct, less likely to go viral, and soon disappear into the ether of forgotten adverts.
That's fucked
And
up.
of course, this video does not come across like an advert at all. It appears to be a simple philanthropic act from a socially responsible company. Jenny O, Vice President of Marketing Nicole Ben, told the Associate Press that he's entertaining and he makes giving back and these philanthropic tie-ins really cool to be part of. And she told WINT that what a great way for Jenny O to partner with somebody that we can really tell the story about making sure everybody has a Thanksgiving turkey on their table for that special holiday. She continues, no matter what their gathering size is, Genio is going to be helping provide turkeys for families, and then they just have to bring the sides and really enjoy Thanksgiving all together. Comments from articles like these and the articles themselves have been syndicated across the web by outlets like The Independent, Yahoo News, and US News. So, other than the obvious publicity, what motivation could Jenny O have for publicly giving away free turkeys every year? Well, Jenny O is owned by Hormel Foods, a huge conglomerate which owns over 40 brands including Jenny O, Spam, Applegate, and
Spam?
Skippy Peanut Butter. Conglomerates like Hormel, Nestle, PepsiCo, and as we'll see in a second, Smithfield, dominate the market in the US and much of the rest of the world. In 2021, Hormel, Jenny O's parent, and Smithfield, who MrBeast has also worked with in this Feeding America video, were both accused of being involved in an illegal price-fixing scheme to inflate the prices of pork and increase their profits. These two companies, Hormel and Smithfield, along with two others, Tyson and JBS, control 80% of the meat market in the United States. The lawsuit accused the suppliers of trying to, quote, fix, raise, stabilize, and maintain artificially inflated prices for pork sold in the United States since 2009. In 2021, Smithfield, whose Chinese owner, WH Group, is the world's largest supplier of pork, settled, paying $83 million in fines. And there's been an increase in the discovery of similar price-fixing schemes in big meat in recent years. In 2021, Tyson Foods and Pilgrim's Pride were fined $221 million and $108 million respectively for doing the same thing in the poultry industry. And seafood giant Bumblebee Foods CEO Chris Liszczynski was sentenced to 14 months in prison in 2020 for price fixing in the tuna industry. Is it a coincidence that the same people who are affected by price-fixing schemes that satisfy rich CEOs and shareholders but drive up the price of everyday essentials are the same people who need to come to a food drive to get handouts at Thanksgiving? In 2021, The Guardian investigated the effect these huge food monopolies have on our economies and societies. Nina Lakiani, Alia Utiova, and Alvin Chang write that a handful of powerful companies control the majority market share of almost 80% of dozens of grocery items bought regularly by ordinary Americans. These conglomerates have been growing in power since the 80s as regulations have been weakened, mergers and acquisitions have been encouraged to cut costs, and lobbying of politicians has increased, while at the same time half of the least well-paid jobs are in the food industry. The conditions are getting worse too. One study in 2013 found that 42% of poultry workers had some evidence of carpal tunnel. One former worker at Chicken Quick said that there are so many injustices there. Sometimes you get really dizzy from how fast the line speed went, but we're not allowed to say we're not going to work at this speed. They're not asking you, they're telling you you have to do it. In 2019, these workers at Genio went on strike when one claimed she wasn't offered medical attention and was fired after her hand got stuck in a machine she was never trained to work on in the first place. Debbie Berkowitz of the National Employment Law Project said that the meatpacking industry is much more dangerous now than in the 90s, and the biggest factors are consolidation and cutting corners of worker safety. And Amanda Starbuck, a policy analyst at Food and Water Watch, told The Guardian that it's a system designed to funnel money into the hands of corporate shareholders and executives while exploiting farmers and workers and deceiving consumers about choice, abundance, and efficiency. So remember, Genio spent $250,000 on this video with Mr. Beast. The previous year, during the 2020 election cycle, the food industry spent $175 million on lobbying and political contributions. 2/3 went to Republicans who want to roll back regulations even further. And to understand how much of an effect this has and how popular it's become with the industry, it's worth noting that the figure was only 29 million in 1992. These conglomerates dominate our shelves and our politics while driving out competition and inflating prices. Genio's parent, Hormel Foods' profits have skyrocketed in recent years, while the price farmers get paid for meat has declined at the same time. Across the world, while food conglomerates do well, farmers are struggling financially, getting into debt and facing a mental health crisis. The same report in The Guardian writes, advocates say that a toxic mix of financial woes, climate chaos, and trade wars have contributed to a mental health crisis among farmers. Farmers are one of the most likely groups to take their own lives in countries including the US, Australia, the UK, and India. In the Midwest alone, 450 farmers committed suicide between just 2014 and 2018. In the UK, a farmer takes their life every week, and in India, 270,000 farmers have died by suicide since 1995. The president of Family Farm Action, Joe Maxwell, told The Guardian that the economic power of these corporations enable them to wield huge political influence, so we have a system in which farmers are on a treadmill just trying to stay afloat. Basically, there's a handful of individuals in the world, mostly white men, who make money by dictating who farms, what gets farmed, and who gets to eat. Consumer choice is an illusion. The transnationals control everything in this extractive agricultural model.
E é por isso que o Mr.
Furthermore,
Beast é uma
farming
besta.
in the US relies on an influx of some 2.5 million undocumented migrants. These are workers who have no recourse, no rights, and likely no healthcare. And before we even get to the wage stagnation workers have experienced since the 70s, the increasing inequality across the world, the pollution the meat industry emits, Hormel Foods' share price looks like this.
So as long as Genio can improve their image by throwing $250,000 to partner with a fun YouTuber that probably isn't going to ask many questions, has more influence than any farmer, worker or migrant, then they probably don't have much to worry about.
And we can see something similar happening under the surface of Mr. Beast's Team C's campaign. In this video, I cleaned the world's dirtiest beach. Mr. Beast and friends commendably organised to clean up trash from Bayos de Hiana in the Dominican Republic. The storyline is classic Mr. Beast, as they realise how long something is taking, how insurmountable the task is, the stunt escalates as they bring in more volunteers and eventually admit that obviously the beach is going to get dirty again. Then this ocean cleanup device, a trash-eating robot, is introduced and they tell the viewer that for every $1 you donate, £1 of trash can be removed from the ocean. Half of the money will go towards paying volunteers to clean beaches, while the other half will go to ocean cleanup. Many have already questioned the premise. Science YouTuber Simon Clark has pointed out that the project is problematic and could end up doing more harm than good. There's up to 150 million tonnes of plastic in the ocean, much of which is small microplastics which just cannot be removed like this, if at all, and we add another 8 million tonnes each year, a figure that continues to rise. Team C's stated goal to remove 13,600 tonnes is, quite literally, a drop in the
Então como
ocean.
é que está o God of
As
War?
Clark points out, Team C's will remove in 3 years what's added in 15 hours. And many marine biologists have also questioned the premise, pointing out that the problem is much more systemic.
But I want to ask a different question. Why is the project so popular in the first place? Why are we focusing on this trash-eating robot in the first place? Why have solutions like this attracted the attention of so many YouTubers? Clark calls it the misdirection of attention.
É o que eu digo, meu. É tipo filme da
Why is our
Marvel.
attention drawn to this solution, but not other ones?
While machines like this look pretty cool and taking your friends to clean up really dirty beaches might make for exciting content, much more engaging than one lobbying the government and plastic industry for change, we can also follow the money here and find out who is funding the promotion of devices like this. Ocean Cleanup lists its partners on its website. They include Cefalio, the world's second largest manufacturer of plastic sunglasses, Akzo Nobel, an $8.5 billion multinational manufacturer of paint and chemicals, and right at the top,
Se calhar não-
under
não ter aqui,
our
não.
most generous partners, Coca-Cola, who are quote,
Coca-Cola.
the world's worst plastic polluter for the 4th year in
Filhos
a
da
row
puta.
in 2021,
Nunca mais bebo Coca-Cola.
according to the NGO Break Free from Plastic.
So let's quickly talk about why the world's best-known supplier of gut-rotting sugar in ocean-rotting plastic would want to spend so much money funding a philanthropic shiny garbage eater. Coca-Cola obviously has a
Coca-Cola.
huge budget. They spend around $4 billion a year on advertising and $1 billion a year on philanthropic grants, which, as I hope I've convinced you by now, should be included as a type of advertising really, and often as literal direct lobbying.
In 2005, for example, Coca-Cola donated $1 million to the American Association of
puta.
Pediatric Dentistry. Yes, kids' dentistry. And like clockwork, this study found that there was a shift in tone on the subject of sugary drinks from the AAPD. Quote, from describing soft drinks as a significant factor in tooth decay to describing the scientific evidence of the relationship as unclear. Another 2013 philanthropic donation from Coca-Cola and PepsiCo went to the NAACP and the Hispanic Federation. Afterwards, both groups joined Coca-Cola and PepsiCo in a protest against the proposed New York ban on large sugary drinks, arguing that the move would disproportionately affect minorities. Coca-Cola and PepsiCo funded 95 public health organizations between 2011 and 2015. And often, the influence the donations have on the organizations is explicit. The Associated Press discovered leaked Coca-Cola emails that revealed they were directly involved in shaping policy at anti-obesity group GEBN after they received a $1.5 million donation. Coca-Cola's chief health and science officer was involved in advising on content for the website, editing the mission statement, and even choosing senior staff. The emphasis of the advice was in shifting the blame from sugar being responsible for obesity to other factors like a lack of exercise.
Like
the
Coca-Cola.
British Medical Journal reported that an analysis of thousands of emails has shown the extent to which Coca-Cola has sought to obscure its relationship with scientists,
Filhos de
minimise
puta,
perception of its role, and use researchers to promote industry-friendly messaging. These findings represented, quote, a low point in the history of public health.
Of Coca-Cola.
Another study found that Save the Children received $5
Coca-Cola.
million from Coca-Cola and PepsiCo in 2011. And that campaign for a sugary soda soon mysteriously disappeared. So of course Coca-Cola have an interest in promoting a philanthropic cause that supports the appearance that their millions of tons of plastic waste can simply be cleaned up afterwards, that we can all continue using plastic and go on like we are, rather than focusing on real change that will affect their bottom line. And instead of relying on bad taste advertising and lobbying that might affect their public image, corporations like Genio and Coca-Cola have discovered a much more behind-the-scenes and ambiguous funnel that looks something like this. First, invest heavily in philanthropic efforts that align with profits. Second, these efforts become the most well-funded, which then affect the popularity and clout of the talking points around those topics, while simultaneously being able to cover the cause's websites and operations in corporate logos for free advertising, while also benefiting from the positive press coverage. Take one more top supporter of ocean cleanup, A.P. Møller, Maersk, the largest shipping company in the world, with arms in oil drilling, oil tankers and air freight, and who have been accused of being responsible for abusive working conditions and harsh labour practices across the world. Maersk are making a commendable effort to decarbonise at the moment. But why? Well, shipping accounts for 3% of the globe's carbon emissions, burning 300 million metric tonnes of fossil fuels every year, and the industry is nowhere near meeting the Paris Climate Agreement goals that most agree are needed to keep the rise of global temperatures below 2%. Rather than decreasing, shipping emissions actually rose by 10% between 2012 and 2018, and regulators are beginning to realise that tougher restrictions are inevitably going to be needed. By 2026, for example, shipping companies like Maersk in the EU will have to pay a tax on carbon emissions. Like Coca-Cola, Maersk has a clear vested interest in supporting the cleanup of pollution after it's been used to generate profits, rather than supporting causes that might actually make a difference in the first place. The corporate funneling of resources into philanthropy that share their message means that the media are more likely to listen to the non-profits, like ocean cleanup, uncritically. Corporations get what they want without the crassness of advertising or risking the bad
Coca-Cola.
press from lobbying politicians
Eu não
directly.
consigo pular este gajo assim a
Instead,
partir do momento
they
em que
end
ele
up
disse Coca-Cola
financing
uma
and
vez.
using useful idiots. A term I don't really like. I'm
Useful
not
idiot.
calling Mr. Beast an idiot,
Yeah, meu.
but
Para de fazer
it goes
isso, meu.
some
Palhaço.
way in
Palhaço de
capturing
merda, meu.
logic. Naive entertainers and uncritical journalists who end up on their side without even really knowing or considering why. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled, convincing the world he didn't exist, disappearing into the shadowy margins using sleights of hand and misdirection.
Oceanic Society writes about the best way to reduce plastic pollution in the ocean. Beach cleanups are there, but the top two are to reduce the use of plastics in the first place and, quote, support legislation to curb plastic production and waste. By supporting specific causes, companies like Genio, Coca-Cola and Maersk
Coca
are
what?
essentially saying, don't worry about this huge mess we're all making, guys. We can just tidy it up tomorrow, in the morning. Katie Matthews, chief scientist at advocacy group Oceana, told Vox that it's like mopping up the spill when the spigot is still on. We can't clean up our way out of plastic pollution. But once they become magically well funded, ocean cleanup and other projects like them become the topic of conversation, a trend, a talking point, placed on a pedestal to divert attention away from the real problem.
Away from the
They get
Coca-Cola.
turned into spectacle, exciting new content-worthy tech, massaged into flashy YouTuber-supported positive image, supplanting the rather dull, laborious and costly task of actually changing our attitudes, reducing use and affecting real change.
And it's worth quickly noting that this, of course, is everywhere. For example, in leaked documents describing the agrochemical giant Monsanto's funding of grantees that happen to disagree with banning its controversial pesticide Roundup, a Monsanto executive states that the key will be keeping Monsanto in the background so as not to harm the credibility of the information. In another study,
Credibility of
during a merger
Coca-Cola.
between telecommunications giants Comcast and NBCU, its author Susan Crawford found that, quote, the company encouraged letters to the FCC from more than 1,000 non-profits, including community centres, rehabilitation centres, civil rights groups, community colleges, sports programmes and senior citizen groups. What these organisations know about telecommunications mergers is unclear. Another leaked document from the oil giant Mobil describes how donations should have a benefit to Mobil. And in this study of donations, authors Marianne Bertrand, Mathilde Bombardini, Raymond Fissman, Brad Hakkinen and Francisco Trebi describe corporate philanthropy as a hall of mirrors. They write that their research robustly shows that, quote, non-profits are more likely to comment on the same regulation
Comment
as their
on the
donors,
Coca-Cola.
and that this co-commentary is most strongly associated with donations in the year immediately preceding the comments. In short, the study found that a donation leads to a 76% chance of a shift in commentary.
And sometimes the influence is even more direct. We can see this trend illustrated most clearly through one of its worst examples, the Bill, Hillary and Chelsea Clinton Foundation.
The non-profit, which has
Então.
raised around $2 billion, has
bros.
been plagued with accusations of conflicts of interest, cash for favours and a lack of transparency. One employee claimed he could point to over 500 conflicts of interest at the foundation. The foundation's annual event is described as a place for, quote, showcasing opportunities, a place where members can publicise their philanthropy to the nearly 1,000 members of the media who are on site at the annual meeting each year to report on the accomplishments of CGI members. To attend this prestigious event, you have to have paid a $20,000 membership fee. McGooey writes that it's an annual extravaganza permitting donors to announce vast donations secure in the knowledge that a promise is not exactly a binding commitment. There is no global cabal of philanthropic bounty hunters making sure CGI attendees make good on their pledges. And some of the motivations of the foundation's donors are crystal clear. Mining magnate Frank Guistra travelled with Clinton around developing nations on a philanthropic mission. Clinton brought the contacts and Guistra bought the MD-87 private jet. In Kazakhstan, Clinton and Guistra happened to dine with the then president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, and they happened to discuss Guistra's mining interests. 3 days later, a $450 million deal was announced which
Talking about
stunned the mining
Coca-Cola.
industry. Later, Clinton and Guistra met the president of Colombia, Alvaro Uribe. Soon after, a $250 million oil venture was struck with a shell company that had links to Guistra.
If this is
Coincidence?
philanthropy, it's really rewarding. And I imagine most people don't dream of securing multi-million-dollar contracts while they're volunteering to feed the homeless.
More and more corporations are cutting out the middleman and starting their own foundations so that they can philanthropize directly. This accounts for that rise in private foundations we talked about earlier. One of the worst offenders here is Walmart. Its foundation lobbies against higher taxes, contributes to political candidates and think tanks, and supports the privatization of education. It's also been accused of illegally lobbying in areas it wants Walmart to expand into.
So when it comes to Coca-Cola, Genio, Walmart, big meat, big
Coca-Cola
oil,
Foundation.
chemical companies, mining interests, let's call a spade and call it what it is. It's not philanthropy, it's lobbying. Often indirect lobbying, but lobbying all the same, lobbying public opinion. In fact, an old 1946 lobbying act described a lobbyist as
any person who shall engage himself for pay or for any consideration of the purpose of attempting to influence the passage or defeat of any legislation by the Congress of the United States.
What corporations have discovered is that influence is much more influential and much more hidden when they take their cash a bit more upstream, away from Congress and into the courts of public
the Coca-Colas and the Pepsis. Motherfuckers.
I want to turn now to how the narratives financed by corporate cash function to support
corporate Coca-Colas,
resist change and boost profits. The narratives hang
farming
together
herd
with the help of a couple of threads that we can see running
feed
through Mr.
12
Beast's
creatures.
First, the narrative tends to make people feel good. It has a feel-good factor. And second, the narrative tends to give the impression that the current way of doing business and politics is fine, and they, the elite, have got this covered.
Não, agora estamos a ouvir os fucking capitalist motherfuckers from Coca-Cola.
It went viral in 2018
Those bitches.
when Domino's committed to filling
Sabias que eles na verdade não são
and telling its customers that
não são boas pessoas, afinal são uma evil corporation.
Pictures of some of the paving projects. We have a link on our CBS 42 News app for you to
Eu achava que não, este vídeo está-me a elucidar.
Just search paving for pizza.
The campaign gets picked up
It's
by
the Coca-Cola.
endless websites and news outlets who eagerly display the images of trucks with the Domino's logo filling
I thought they were
holes
my
again with
friends,
the
man.
Domino's logo next to
What the
signs
fuck is this
with
shit?
Yes, Domino's logo.
This video,
As Bernie
this
Sanders
video
complained
changed
at the time,
everything.
coverage usually happened to sidestep or ignore the question of why
This is
there
the
were so many
Coca-Cola video.
potholes in the first place. Author Anand Giridharadas told Fast Company that roads should be a pretty open and shut case for government. We don't need pizza companies to build roads. We need pizza companies to pay their workers enough and pay their taxes. He continued,
This guy is
"We
sounding
use
like
the
a commie."
do-gooding to undermine the idea of solving these problems together.
Como é que é? Bora falar de
It's
política.
not just like
Adoro política.
subsidizing a road. At some point, on some panel somewhere, their road paving
Este Coca-Cola?
will then be
Eu
used
bebi
to
água,
say
já não tinha
it's better
Coca-Cola.
to keep taxes
Fui comprar
low,
comida
it's
de cão e
better to have
Coca-Cola
government not
também.
do a lot, that the private sector can step up.
Tipo, eu ouvi este vídeo
Giridharadas makes
em
an
que eles
incisive
basicamente
point.
mostram
The
como a
basic
Coca-Cola é
premise of
evil e
supplying
eu só
public
quero comprar
goods
mais
is that,
Coca-Cola ainda.
unfortunately, it's work.
E a tirar
Coming
mais plástico
together,
para os
paying
golfinhos.
taxes, solving problems comes at a cost
E
in
asfixiá-los.
time and resources that, as an investment,
Só porque este gajo é um
pays
palhaço,
us
mais
all
nada.
dividends as a
Para disso.
community
Senão eu até
later
preferia
on.
salvar o mundo.
The community,
Mas agora
all of
que eu
us
ouvi este
chip in
gajo,
taxes, and everyone reaps the
caguei,
benefits
certo?
equally.
Of course, when this is left to private individuals, it leaves a massive question mark
Hate
as to
this
whether
guy.
these services will be supplied to everyone equally, rather than just the roads that Domino's happen to need for profit.
Mr. Beast's sponsorship relies on the same logic. They have to be entertaining. Have a
Achas que eu tenho assim
feel-good
tanto amor
factor.
por este
They
jogo?
have to get views.
Uma stream de
When in
guitarra? Eu antes
reality,
fazia.
difficult problems like global warming, labour rights, not needing a handout at Thanksgiving.
Agora só posso
is not
tocar
always
músicas
fun.
aprovadas pela
Can't always
Coca-Cola.
be fun-washed and turned into an entertaining spectacle. It often leaves commentators like this one feeling like they've contributed to solving a problem just by clicking like and sitting through an advert.
And it gives the impression that problems can be solved on a win-win basis, a positive sum game, where we can all use the market to exchange our way out of problems and difficulties
of
and all make a
Coca-Cola.
profit at the same time. Where I'll only give some change to a homeless person if I get something in return. Where I must be entertained to do philanthropy. Where I only donate to any cause in return
Quero tocar
to
com pessoas.
sponsorship deals, and I only support those causes that align
É
with
como,
my
é como
interests
quando
in
uso a minha
some
pila. A
way.
minha pila preta
Economist Fred
e
Hirsch called this
bonita.
the commercialization
Também só me
effect,
apetece usá-la com
when
pessoas.
the introduction of commercial mechanisms into an idea or an object or
An
a
idea of
relationship
Coca-Cola.
changes the nature of that thing. Philosopher Michael Sandel points to examples like hiring friends for the day, paying for a best man speech, auctioning off college admissions and selling adverts
Já
on
tens-
police cars
já tens este
and
jogo?
ambulances. Commercializing certain things that are meant to be based on such old-fashioned things like values and
Old-fashioned
fairness and meaning,
Coca-Colas.
twists and changes that thing beyond recognition.
I remember back
You
in
can't
my
buy
day.
a friend. A friend is meant to mean something deeper. A best man speech isn't the same if it's written by an algorithm, say. Hirsch, who coined the term, said that the commercialization effect was the
É assim,
effect on the
aquilo tem
characteristics
cross
of a product or
play
activity
ou lá
of
o caralho,
supplying
portanto
it
podes comprar onde
exclusively
quiseres.
or predominantly on commercial terms
Acho que a tua
rather than on
science
some other basis,
system,
such as
provavelmente eles lá
informal
compram isto por mais
exchange,
dinheiro.
mutual obligation, altruism or love, or feelings
Como é que se chama o
of
system onde eu
service or
estou?
obligation.
When philanthropy is commercialized in this way, it has to drain it of important
Material,
questions, conceal any
shipping,
unfavorable
trading,
elements, and draw out the
Scientific.
feel-good
Provavelmente os gajos
factor.
vendem isto por
Should
dentro.
these things really make us feel good, though? Or should they make us feel
Provavelmente aqueles
guilty,
eles
lazy,
num sistema de
spur us
science
into action
compram aquelas coisas
rather
por
than
muito dinheiro.
provide escapism? What happens when a story that
Acho que é
makes
só
the
impressive
limelight
a Switch
is not
aguentar com o
a feel-good
terraforming deste
story?
jogo.
What happens
Não sei se
if
sabes o que é
it's
terraforming.
depressing, violent, difficult? When corporations are motivated by profit to
Isso é
support
que é Másio.
philanthropic causes that only align with their motives, and then partner with the media in a way that anaesthetizes the problem to make
Deixa eu ver se
everyone
eles
feel
vendem.
better, then of
Não, to
course
create.
the
Yeah,
more
vendem
difficult,
por
boring,
buereré de buereré.
academic, less well-funded solutions will get crowded out. Who
Because
wants
não
to
vale
read
pena.
about plastic
be
pollution
honest.
when they can go and watch a Mr. Beast video? Which leads us to the
19%.
second phenomenon
É melhor.
that ties this narrative together, what I'll call the big man
Manipulador.
effect.
Olha, o item chama-se mesmo
The new
Terrain Manipulator.
philanthropists, from Carnegie and Rockefeller to Clinton, Mr. Beast and Coca-Cola and Genio,
Coca what now?
lead us to an
I
important
wanna
question
sell the
that I mentioned
superconducting fiber.
earlier. Where's the line between altruism and self-interest? And does it matter?
Does it matter?
In the
All that
1960s,
matters
anthropologists
is that
studying tribes in Papua
I
New
hate
Guinea discovered a
Coca-Cola.
phrase the tribespeople
Enquanto bebe
had,
uma Coca-Cola.
the big man. They found that tribe leaders had become well known and respected for one skill in particular.
Acho que tenho problema
Giving
qualquer.
gift.
Eu passei a ter problema com
This
este
gift
tipo de
giving
vídeos. Os
created a
vídeos são,
unique
como é
type
que se
of
chama?
economy, one where who gave gifts to whom and when acted
Esqueci-me do
as a
nome.
type
São
of
tipo-
exchange for reputation and power.
Digam-me em sinónimos de
The
25.
aim of the big man, that anthropologist Chris Gregory reported, is to acquire a
Mas
large
são tipo
body
isso.
of
São
people,
vídeos que
gift
te querem
debtors,
convencer.
who are obligated to him. Another anthropologist, Marcel Mauss, looked at these
Nas ideias
studies in
deles. Mas
his
tipo,
influential
acho que é
essay, The
assumido,
Gift.
atenção.
He argued that
Não é mentira
giving
nenhuma que eles
gifts was
querem.
sometimes a type of power. It increased the gift giver's prestige. The absolutist ruler of France,
persuading?
King Louis XIV, known
Persuading
for his
videos?
extravagant
Acho que é tipo
palace
isso.
and spending, was also a generous
Não é
supporter
persuading.
of the arts. One of his contemporaries wrote of Louis that let him who wants,
Eu tenho umas
or rather
plantinhas, o que é
who
que
will
achas?
be
Depois
able
isto parte
to
de
do
tudo.
so
Cada
in
vez
a
que dou
worthy
spawn,
fashion,
o
speak
meu
of the
AI
wisdom of
driven
this great king, who provided
Mac,
the life of grace
este
to
gajo,
so many
este bicho,
souls by this holy
ele,
zeal, his
quando eu dou spawn, ele
patience,
aterra
his
aqui e parece que me está a partir o
gentleness,
chão.
his gifts, by laws as
buraco
salutary
foi ele
as
que
they
fez.
are just. Louis created
Maconha
a
Man in
cult
space.
of personality, becoming known
Um
as
dia
the
vou andar na
Sun King,
maconha e
the center of
mas vai ser com
France's
amigos.
universe. He
Um dia vou
commissioned
ter
busts
amigos.
of
Esse
himself
dia.
and portraits and supported
Man.
ballet and theatre and
É como tu
music
disseste,
that
Ers,
ultimately
sonhar por um
functioned
futuro.
as well as
E
royal
esse
propaganda.
futuro é esse.
Louis knew that in the eyes of the public, more than anything, it was important
They're
how
filled
one
with
looked.
Coca-Cola.
His gifts, like the leaders of tribes in Papua New Guinea, established prestige. His people were his children, looked after by a benevolent benefactor.
Tenho que dar nomes a estas coisas e
Oscar
organizar as
Wilde wrote a
coisas.
famous
Mas,
essay
come on.
critiquing charity, saying that
It's me.
it
I would
was
never-
really
I
about
would never
prestige.
organise
He
anything.
complained about how the so-called benevolence of wealthy
so-called
Victorian
Coca-Cola.
industrialists was a means to compensate for their harsh labour practices. He wrote that the
Meat
best
taken.
among the poor are never grateful.
I'm sorry, eu não consigo
They
ver
are
isso sem me rir.
ungrateful,
Sorry, Ers.
discontented, disobedient and rebellious. They are quite right to be so. Why should they be grateful for the
por
crumbs
cima
that
estou
fall
cansado,
from the
Ers.
rich man's table? They should be seated at the board and are beginning to know it. And the French poet
tenho força para me
Baudelaire
rir.
saw through this too. In a short story about a man giving a counterfeit coin to a beggar, he wrote that his aim had been to do a good deed while at the same
And to
time
have a little
making
bit of
good deal,
Coca-Cola.
to earn 40 cents and the heart of God, to win paradise economically, in short, to pick up gratis the certificate of a charitable man. The French philosopher Jacques Derrida
Where's my
also
fungal
saw
mold?
gifts were full of double meanings. They can be remedies, they can be selfless, but they can be self-interested, calculated, even poisonous and double-edged.
Does this mean we should always look at Mr. Beast videos like this cynically?
Yes,
always
we should.
motivated by
Mr. Beast is
profit
literally
and
fucking
self-interest?
Coca-Cola, which means
Not
it's evil.
necessarily. As Derrida saw, we have multiple, overlapping,
Quem é que
sometimes
assumiu essas coisas?
contradictory
Ninguém.
motivations in life. But we should
Ninguém vai lá,
always
ninguém.
try and demystify what those motivations
A menos que a Coca-Cola dê
are
patrocínio.
and what the results of them are.
Aí o pessoal já vai.
Mr. Beast is not solving a homelessness problem. Homelessness will never be solved in this way. In fact, what's commercialized in videos like this is our fascination with just how unlikely
Coca-Cola?
this is to happen. Of course we can't help but click on a video like this. Of course we're all curious.
What?
because
Really?
it's
I don't give a
such
shit.
Singular event.
I don't
such
give a shit about
one-off,
Coca-Cola,
so
dude.
astronomically improbable that we just have to see the reaction.
But when it comes to widespread structural social issues like pollution, homelessness, poverty and hunger,
You have to create some
philanthropy
food
like
pellets.
this doesn't cut it. The gifts, when caught up in a web of PR,
vamos procurar uns bichos
misdirection
ao
and
Mac.
whitewashing,
Olha, eu estou a
have the
passear de
same
Mac. O
effect
que é que
of
achas?
placing
Achas
a
bem ou
little
achas mal?
Band-Aid
Acho
over a
muito
cut,
bem. Isto foi
just
esta,
enough to
falar.
mask it, just enough to boost image, to make everyone involved look good, without ever addressing the underlying problem.
The problem of Coca-Cola.
In the German ideology, Karl Marx wrote that the ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling
Será que a
idea,
ideia deste gajo é tipo...
i.e. the class which is the ruling material
Se eu
force
tiver
of
British
society
accent,
is
toda a
at the
gente vai
same
acreditar em
time
mim.
its ruling
Será que é essa a ideia
intellectual
deste
force,
gajo?
the class which has the means of material production at its disposal, has control at the same time over the means of mental production, so that thereby, generally speaking, the ideas of those who lack the means of mental production are subject
Mean
to it.
machine.
The ruling ideas are nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships. The dominant material relationships
Se bem que
as
uma vez
ideas.
disseram uma coisa
Of course corporations
que eu achei
with deep
interessante.
pockets want to be associated
Se bem que este
with
gajo
fun
exagera
YouTubers
no
who
caralho,
won't
tipo, é
have
só
too many
corporations
questions.
e o caralho.
Of course they want to look
Parece que estou a falar
like
com um
they're
maluco,
solving
meu.
problems
Estás a ver
and
quando
acting
falas com o pessoal?
benevolently in everyone's interest. Capitalist mythology creates a kind of modern
Como é que se chamam aquelas pessoas que é só... são fucking delusional? Esquizofrénicos. Parece que estou a falar com um esquizofrénico. É o problema deste gajo. Mas, anyway, o tipo... a ideia destes vídeos, acho eu, é... a maneira como é suposto dares engage aos vídeos é suposto ser uma maneira, como é que eu ia dizer, cética. Tipo, não é suposto ouvir as coisas e dizer alright, acredita em tudo. Mas não é suposto ser isso, no entanto acho que é o que muita gente faz e então se calhar a reputação destes vídeos vai descendo e descendo e descendo, deste tipo de vídeos. Por outro lado, epá, este gajo em específico, foda-se. Yeah. Eu nem sequer sou assim tão fã do capitalismo quanto isso. Mas também, opá, de andar aqui com com esquizofrenias também não é preciso, meu. Não quero ser aquele gajo, mas estou a ser aquele gajo. Onde é que eu tenho sítio para papar bicho? Olha, Eres, vou-te mostrar uma coisa. Blue Planet. Este planeta é mesmo bonito, foi por isso que eu fiz aqui uma base. Mas depois, ao mesmo tempo, o que é que eu fiz também? Reparei que tinha muitos bichinhos lá.
beastly figure, a feel-good entertainer, a generous big man, crafted by profit, image, PR,
Oh, the profits of the
spectacle.
corporations.
Someone that just gets stuff done.
No,
It doesn't need the government or the community and could do it
Come
all
on, dude.
for clicks,
Chill.
views and
Fucking
likes.
chill, bro.
The new philanthropy
Este gajo podia
capitalism
ser.
creates the impression that the elite, their flashy robots,
Olha só as
and
palavras que ele está a usar. Não é? Tipo, the elite, the government. Isto não parece daqueles gajos que te estragaria a festa, imagina, Toga, tu fazias um churrasco que sempre quiseste fazer. Este gajo chegava lá, bebia 2 cervejas e fodia logo tudo. You don't understand, man. The corporations. Are you insane? Are you drinking Coca-Cola?
Fun-loving entertainers and their technology.
He would fucking ruin the party
Everything
immediately.
under control.
In his book Mythologies, Roland
Sure,
Barthes comments
misinterpret
on
the
French
book
priest
to say whatever you
Abbé
want,
Pierre,
right?
He became a famous household media figure in France in the post-war period. Barthes wrote that he was interested in the enormous consumption of media
Posso dar mais
about
papa?
him by the public. He said that the public, no longer having access to the real experience of apostleship, except through the bric-a-brac associated with
Brick a
it,
what?
are getting used to acquiring a clear conscience by merely looking at the shop window of saintliness. And I get worried about a society which consumes with
Yes.
such avidity
The
the display
society.
of charity that it forgets to ask itself questions
E a
about
Esplaneta
its
é mesmo bonito.
consequences, its uses,
Eu guardei,
and its
eu
limits.
fiz a base por causa
And I
disso.
then
No
start to
entanto,
wonder
esta área,
whether
como
the
tem muitos
fine and
bichinhos,
touching
eu fiz
iconography
coisa
of the
para.
Abbé Pierre is not
Olha,
the alibi
isto aqui são
which a
um
sizable
automated
part of
feeder,
the
isto é
nation uses in order,
coisa que
once
junta aos
more,
leitinhos.
to substitute with impunity the signs of charity for
Leitinhos e
the
ovos.
reality of justice. Michael Edwards, a former
Corporate food
executive of the Ford Foundation, has become a
corporations.
vocal critic of the new
Olha, este gajo podia,
philanthropic
se tivesse a voz do,
mentality.
do
He
Snake,
argues that,
era mais fixe, não
among
era?
other things, it's eroding support for government spending on public services, and it's simply never going to
Lalilo-lalo.
replace us coming together to solve problems democratically. In 2020,
Só apareceu recently
for
fed em
example,
todos, não é?
the
Por causa
Gates
da máquina.
Foundation, of course the biggest
Já posso
of
voltar
them
à
all,
Mission Agent.
spent
Ok, aquilo
$5
conta
billion.
como.
In contrast, the US
mas que era
government
mostrar-
budget
era
is
melhor
almost
mostrar o-
$7 trillion.
Trillion
There are
dollars
another
of the
1.4
corporation.
million registered non-profits
David
in
Hayter.
America, and most of them, about
chapéu de alumínio.
73%, have budgets under $500,000, and millions of
Millions
people
of
volunteer for these
corporations.
charities every day. This is where the real work happens.
The real
With
elite.
nothing in return, just volunteering. McGooey writes that Edwards and other outspoken critics
I
point
can
out that
take this guy
private
serious.
philanthropy is no substitution for hard-fought battles over labour laws and
Olha
social
para esta
security,
erva.
in part because
Toda
philanthropy
azul.
can be
É mesmo gira.
retracted on a whim, while elected officials, at least in theory, have citizens to answer to.
Como
On the
assim?
one hand, wealthy PR departments support
Os
entertaining
desertos,
videos and ad campaigns and philanthropy and spend a fortune on lobbying, while on the other, they preside
Eu não sei, eu
over an
nunca mais
economy
acompanhei nada
that
de
by many
música.
measures is getting worse.
Eu só gosto de Evanescence
Today,
ou
the
esse.
share of young people running their own business
Wake me
has fallen
up.
by 2/3 since
I
the
can't wake
1980s.
up.
Low-paid
Save
work has
me.
declined, and the income of the bottom half has stagnated, while the rich have gotten
Agora
immeasurably
já
richer.
sabes, já vou ter
Health
que ouvir.
outcomes for many groups are declining. Mental health problems are becoming an epidemic, and there's a stark divide between wealthier cities and
I'm sorry, I can't listen to this guy anymore. Será que vou ser banido? Espero que sim.
How can you see
Oh, vão ser esses os seus concertos?
my eyes like open doors, leading
Se fosse a ti, aceitava.
out into my core, where I've become so numb, without a soul. My spirit's sleeping somewhere cold until you find me.
Não faço? Olha, eu faria. Se os gajos me dissessem, bro, cover band de Evanescence com o Goofy.
Wake me up,
Eu estava tipo, mas tenho que pagar? Eu pago para fazer parte dessa banda.
Call my name and save me from the dark. Wake me up, put my blood to I can't wake up before I come undone. Save me from the nothing I've become. Now that I know what I'm without, you can't just leave me free.
Bem, onde é que está? Whatever. You know what? Fuck this. Pulse Engine. Ué, sabias que há um item que serve para teres mais controle da nave? Ou desculpa, sim, é isso. Aposto que ias usar esse item logo no início. Não é um item, é um upgrade ou some shit. It's like, come on,
Save me from the nothing I've become. Okay, I'll stop here.
Save me. Ainda no outro dia ouvi o Goofy's Trial. Gosto sempre de voltar a ouvir o Goofy's Trial. Não, não faças isso. Mas porquê? Wake me up. Eu só quero ser feliz, não infeliz. Percebes? Acorda-me. Vou meter este espaço aqui. Só para meter esse tal upgrade. Isto é tanto dinheiro, foda-se. É para isso que serve fazer as quests, não é? Ok, wake up. Free me. Ok, onde é que está? Está aqui. Acho que é override. Flight Assist Override. Já, estás a ver? É cagar no Flight Assist. Bora meter isto, caguei. Que safada bacalhau. Este Flight Assist está bem aqui? Deixa eu ver. É que ao que parece as coisas têm... Por exemplo, isto está junto a Pulse Drive. And that means something. Eu queria dar shuffle a estas coisas, não dá. Não tem espaço. Wake me up. I can't wake up. Free me. Qual é a música que queres meter? Oh, can't you see? Ok, isto deve dar... Aquilo é suposto ficar... laranja. Ficou laranja. Da maneuverability ficou maior. Flight Assist Reduction. Em princípio consigo fazer mais coisas? I don't know, man. Provavelmente consigo virar mais depressa ou uma cena assim. E aqueles assists tipo quando estou a aterrar e o caralho devem diminuir. Oh, não consegues ver. Anyway. Mandaste no Discord. Ok. Estava a pensar se é mais fácil, se é mais difícil. Mas não, é tudo igual. É sempre difícil.
Pequena mini saia de sapato apertado. Pensava que um dia ia sair ao teu lado. Enganei-me ao
que é isto,
ver
Verso?
que arranjaste outro alguém para dançar esse tango que dançavas.
Deixa-me adivinhar, isto é o teu
comigo. Tão boa e calorosa, quis ser tua à primeira.
role model.
Tão doce e amorosa,
Isto é o teu role model, já percebi. Só que é um role model escondido, tipo, nunca vais admitir que é. É só tipo, olha isto que eu estou a gozar. Já te conheço. Isto já fazias cover, certo? Pensei que ela ia dizer cagar, vou dizer a verdade. Quase tanto como os croquetes. Musculoso. Lá vou ser banido do Twitch. Então como é que anda a vida aqui neste settlement? Como é que estão os meus settlers, bros? Oh, só daqui a 40 minutos é que tenho uma cena? Está-se bem. Eu vou estar acordado sequer essa hora. Pensava que eras tu. Eu não sei o que é que haveria de achar se me chamassem canguru, tipo... Era eu ser feio ou bonito? Isto é um insulto ou não? I don't get it. Isto é um insulto ou não? Eu vi um canguru no zoo. Então, e mais coisas? Olha como é que vai ficar ali preto agora. Unrefined pyrite grease. I don't care. Only care about the money. Grantina. Se chamarem canguru, provavelmente é porque estás a usar aquelas bolsas de cintura. Eu uso isso agora. Por causa do cão. Parece ainda mais horrível porque sou gordo. Mas é clássico. Gostei, foi giro. Did I not recall the fragrancy? PZ Tier? Não sei. Acho que ainda gosto mais do PZ. Acho que ainda gosto mais dos croquetes. Cover? Como? Queres que faça cover? Oh, Eres, o Toga quer que eu ande a fazer... deixa-me pensar, como é que se chama? Quer que eu faça jogos daqueles anúncios de jogos que não existem? Aqueles marados do YouTube. Já viste? Eu adormeci a ouvir isto. Adormeceria a ouvir isto, na boa. Pão. Que eu tenho é croquetes. Cuidado com os croquetes. Estou a estragar a música. Com os croquetes.
Olho para o lado. Tiro um ou dois.
Sabes que... Oh, Toga, sempre que eu penso no PZ, eu penso, sabes em quem? No Lombriga. Acho que é a mesma vibe.
Olha a minha volta.
Eles têm a mesma vibe.
Querem-me roubar os croquetes. Olho para o lado.
Pião, pião, pião.
Croquetes. Croquetes.
Sentes isso, não sei? Eu acho que se ele fizesse música, era isto que ele fazia.
Que se foda o bacalhau, que se foda.
100%.
Saio para a rua
Menos flites.
e ao virar a esquina.
As minhas flites são todas fodidas. Croquetes. Há pessoas que me destruíram no Tekken.
Festa de anos,
Oh, mas o Lumbring é um gajo fucking fixe, meu. Tipo stand-up guy.
mas antes de tudo,
Eu acho.
croquetes. Olho para o lado e tiro dois. Não é todos os dias que há croquetes.
Ok, para baixo.
Não há volta a dar. São mesmo muito bons. Croquetes.
É para ali? Será que desci demais? Nunca se desce mais. Am I right, guys? Going down. If you know what I mean. Sexo. Croquetes. Foda-se, foi fodido arranjar esta nave. Eu nunca vou perceber porque é que tem que ser eu a arranjar a nave. Ela não é minha. A nave é do Capitão Balhelha, que sei lá o nome dele sequer. Ainda por cima eu tenho para aí 10 naves, meu. Tratem vocês das vossas naves, pá. Fosga-se, pá. Quer-se dizer. Pior que isto só a Coca-Cola. Capitão não tem vergonha de ser um outsider a arranjar?
Croquetes. Chouriço.
E agora? Tem que ser o Chewbacca, sabes porquê? Porque eu não sei mais. Espera aí, eu lembro que havia uns gajos que eram os conjunto. Eu lembro de curtir esta música. Eu ouvir isto com a Ana. Conjunto Corona com o PZ. Aí era esta música. Isto é daquelas cenas que é para ouvir no jardim. Às 3 da manhã.
OG. Apanha-me encher flexões na pista do rock ao som de uma boa pastilha. Não vim para aqui a lagardeira.
Man, se não fores do Porto é fodido.
Faz um bico a Deus, faz um bico a Deus já. Faz um bico a Deus, senta aqui no teu papá. Uma solução para a tua depressão. Deposita o teu salário na minha congregação. Sedutor, tipo a Serenela Andrade, em horário prime time, espalhando o meu chá. Sou doutor, tipo trolha no andaime, manda um beijo à tua mãe, tipo já. Foi o que ela
Fala com o
disse,
capitão.
foi o que ela disse. Foi o que ela disse, foi o que ela disse. Se ela disse
Sure.
uma calúnia, faço entradas mais potentes que o sol na fúria. Carga de ombro, isto é só uma amostra. Tenho manos em Gondomar e na Trofa. Águas Santas, Rio Tinto e Maia. Perdido na varia.
O pessoal era todo roubado em Águas Santas, by the way. Não saiam em Águas Santas, ok? De comboio.
Quem é o gajo diz que vem do Porto? Apadrinhado no fumo do poeta morto. Só dropina, não traz vitamina. Reconhecido por ter baleado
Só em Campanhã.
menina. Olá, só para vez então.
Mesmo Campanhã,
Só trago
diria que é mais seguro,
atenção.
mas...
Opus dei do Move a jantar no Louvre.
Olha, isto é mesmo gunas. Maxi gunas.
Opus dei do Move a jantar no Louvre. A som do ilustre, por mais que te custe. E sempre te teias. Frutis tudo, ainda lá reduto. Ao som do barulho que não procuro debaixo das meias. Meias. É Tu não me tens muitas ideias em tornar os picas e nadar com as baleias.
Eu estou a ouvir isto e consigo sentir o pessoal a mandar-me o fumo da maconha para a cara. E a dizer, e que mano, tens problemas?
Perdido na variante, a pensar em
Olha o peso,
e às tantas, saio ali nas antas, a fumar umas plantas, bem boas.
Só ele para dizer umas plantas,
Cantas,
para rimar com antas.
no meio desta proa fica à toa, mas comigo está na boa. Afro-português, com ADN, espera a tua vez, minha, eu é que mando. Este quarto está escuro, está demais. Este carro tem seguro para os demais. Contra todos os riscos, eu arrisco a patanisca.
Estou fodido com estas naves.
És apetitosa, com um sem molho. És uma gulosa, chupou-me sobrolho.
Chupou-me sobrolho. Ok.
Façam sushi à maneira.
Essa minha. Eu acho que cheirei uma que tu fizeste, que tinha na gaveta, e parecia-me que já estava dead, ou I don't know, não parecia bem. Mais seca que a pássara da minha avó. Pois é isso. Não dá, meu. A vida está fodida. Estamos todos isolados, meu. Apesar de já não haver isolamento, estamos todos isolados anyway. Já não há cena de mano, vamos ali, ninguém vai lá, ninguém esquece, meu. Sair de casa, só sair de casa, meu. É tipo, há uma desculpa muito forte para sair de casa? É que senão não sei. E eu acho que é essa a atitude, meu, hoje em dia. Estamos fodidos. Sorry lá o não viste a minha pique? Ah pá, estou a dizer que é o sentimento assim em geral, sabes? Olha, mas diz-me uma coisa, levaste com piropos? Não é cerveja, é cerveja, ok? Era para ter sido, mas não foi. Summersby é uma boa vida para levar com piropos. Foste sozinha? E então? Mais rapidamente levas piropos sozinha do que acompanhada? Digo eu. Ora diz-me lá que não é verdade. Como é que era? Saúde! Já viste que a sociedade em que estamos. Uma vez falaste, Merz, sobre qual é o tipo de gajo que tu gostas. E ao que parece na internet tem estado um gajo na moda e provavelmente esse gajo é exatamente o teu tipo. Ele também poderá ser um criminoso, mas também poderá fazer também parte do teu tipo, ser criminoso. Mas ainda não sabemos. Não sei se quer acompanhar. Não sei se quer fazer um Nice Alert Nation. Qual é o teu tipo? Não sei, uma vez descreveste-me. A menos que tenhas falta de memória. Das duas uma. Ou dizes-me o teu tipo, como disseste dessa vez. Ou então admites que te esqueceste. Olha, isto é um full álbum. É isso. Bora ser tipo Vou ser roubado. Não é roubado. Banido do Twitch. Let's go. É que sou Sagitário e não quero piropos. Eu te escrevi e nem sabia que tinha um tipo. Eres. Olha, tens um problema. Na medida em que tens um problema de memória, acho que tens que ir ao seu doutor tomar uns medicamentos da memória. Oi? Não digo isto de uma maneira para te atacar. Digo isto de uma maneira que é tipo, estou preocupado. Mas também, na verdade, desde que não te esqueças das chaves de casa fora de casa, acho que está tudo bem. Oh, Eres, tu é que sabes o que é que gostas, não é? Compreendemos he, him. What? I don't even know what that means. Será que está alto? Acho que está muito alto.
Oh, tens a melhor sarda do país para te fazer feliz. Até rima e a verdade para... Oh, vem-te, puta, vem-te.
É isto que as pessoas dizem quando estão a ver pornografia? Eu não sei, também estou a conhecer, ok, Eres? Eu não conheço nada, não ouço música, não faço nada, não saio de casa. Saio, às vezes vou comprar aí comida de cão. Outras vezes vou ao parque com o cão. Portanto, também não é assim tão mau, ok?
Só de chinelo, sem sapatilha. CV de ser, Simo de Vila. Volta aqui na Simo de Vila. CV de ser, Simo de Vila. Só de chinelo, sem sapatilha.
Ensinados como don't care.
Simo de Vila.
Yeah. I don't even know what that means. Neutrolhos. Parece-me que... Eu não sei o que é que isso é, mas parece que não gostas das pessoas.
Tenho uma pedra no sapato.
Yeah.
Um quarto, ruído pelo rato. Estou farto deste rato. Um dia ainda o mato. Não alimenta, mas também não me sustenta. Eu sou um chato. Deixei a velha neste quarto. Ficou barato.
Isto abre?
Vendi ofrenda só para ganhar espaço. Deixei a velha. Eu tenho um maço de ideias e propósitos. Eu tenho um bafo de tabaco e de vómitos. Mas eu penso, não penses que te ofereço.
Não gosto das pessoas não sentir do lado.
Não te ofereças, não mereço tal negócio.
Nisso acredito.
Se não compensa, volto para a mesa. Corto-te a peça sem licença no sentido exato. Se compensa.
É mesmo assim, chavalo. Tá, cuidado, se não levas com um cavalo. Se continuas a olhar para mim, levas com um estalo.
Só de chinelo, sem sapatilha. CV de ser, Simo de Vila. Volta aqui na Simo de Vila.
Se continuas assim, não te dou carne, dou-te um robalo.
Só de chinelo, sem sapatilha. CV de ser, Simo de Vila.
Eu acho que quando uma pessoa não sai de casa, tem mais tendência a não gostar de pessoas, ou a dizer que não gosta, porque não está habituada a lidar com pessoas, e então cada interação é tão podre que é tipo, foda-se. Como um gajo não está habituado, não é? Foda-se, fuck this shit, meu. Fuck this shit, maninho. Caguei para as pessoas. Peraí, algum destes diz They're all back? Ok, Expeditions. Combat patrol. Should I make some combat items? Can I even? Oh god. Mesmo assim, mesmo assim, hidromel? Eu disse hidromel? A primeira vez e única que eu bebi hidromel foi com a Erz.
Atento no que desfoca, a coelha deu na coca. Atento no que desfoca, a coelha deu na coca. Pois é, dar uns quantos chutes de cara até colombiano no ar assim no estaminé. E poupa mais, poupa mais. Com
Tá aqui.
cartão tu poupas
Explosive
mais.
drones.
Duas sapatonas na cama com a camisa dos teus pais. Tu és demais, tu és demais. Toda a gente sabe que o rei do rap é o Pires, então não contes a ninguém. Toda a gente sabe que o rei do rap é o Pires, então não contes a ninguém. Toda a gente sabe que o rei do rap é o Pires, então
Mesmo
não
assim,
contes
ó
a
chavalo.
ninguém. As fofas do Pires
Leva já com um
andavam
cavalo.
de mão em mão,
As minhas rimas são sempre ser as mesmas,
andavam
ok?
de mão em mão, foram ter a casa nova lá perto do São João.
E se vocês não gostarem, levam com um
João,
estalo.
é só jajão. Rapper não gosta
É só
de
jajão,
com
maninho.
um rapaz é
Estive lá no sábado
mas
e na
se forem
terça.
duas,
E todos os
acompanham
dias.
tal.
Espetáculo.
Duas de letra, coisa e tal, com o sorriso em dentes de metal. Paranormal.
Levas com um
Toda a gente
bacanal.
sabe, o rei do rap é o Pires, então não contes a ninguém.
Ora bem, eu tenho alguma fighting
Toda a gente
palhelha,
sabe,
está
o
aqui,
rei do
combat.
rap é o Pires, então não contes
Mas eles são bué de fracotes, meu.
Toda a gente sabe que o rei do rap é o Pires, então não contes a ninguém. Toda a gente sabe que o rei do rap é o Pires, então não contes a ninguém.
Isto quer dizer que a nave não vai sobreviver ou assim? Where's my support, motherfucker? No rating of 3? No, I have a rating of 3. Yeah. Balanced expedition.
E agora, salgado?
Este exploration motherfucker. É melhor levar 2 estrelas. Não? Trade expedition. I got some traders. Not traitors, traders.
Come mais forte, come. Como se estivesse cheia de fome. Isso.
I should have some mind control devices.
Agora quero que lhe des mais forte ainda.
O que é que achas deste base? Mind control device. I need a solar mirror. That fucking sucks because of a simple reason.
Isso. Não pares, continua.
No space? Epá, estão sempre a fazer o sexo estes, pá, tenham calma.
Até a letra engana.
Os miúdos só pensam nisso, né?
Quando um gajo se engana ao erro, está tudo feliz já.
Ah, eu posso usar este cargo bulkhead.
Fruta da ira.
Eu dá-me a cabeça, não sei porquê, mas não peguei na guitarra, fico sempre com guilt e não consigo não pensar que não peguei.
A fruta da ira.
Oh, enganei-me, não é isto que eu quero.
Vai no sobe e desce, querida, vai no sobe e desce. Não sabe o sobe e desce.
Porquê que será que as pessoas sentem guilt quando não fazem certas coisas? Eu também gostava de saber para mim o porquê disso.
Querida ainda é menor, querida ainda é menor. Querida ainda é menor, mas tem tese no bondade. Ai meu Deus, tenha bondade, eu estou farto desta idade. Queres deitar-te? Eu nunca vou poder.
Ok,
ir
quero fazer um
amar,
solar
mas vais ter
motherfucker.
saudade. Saudade é roubada, adormeço solitário, só voltado para outro
E
lado.
agora
Voltei do
posso
outro
fazer
lado,
um
os
consumable.
como um erro crasso.
que é um mind control device.
É o hidromel.
É o hidromel. É o hidromel. Leva já com o papel. Vou-te cortar os dedos. O que eu gosto é de papel. Se tenho cedo, bebo hidromel. Trade. Let's go. E agora vou pôr o Mind Control Device aqui. Vai ser mais tranquilo? I don't know. Boa sorte. Olha, lá foi ele. Só fica a faltar uma Balanced Expedition. Quantos Dude Bros é que eu tenho? 30 mil. Oh, que caralho. Vão todos. Vai tudo. Trabalhar ainda. Já os mandei embora. By the way, eu tenho mais naves. Será que já consigo arranjar um bocadinho mais esta nave? Espera aí. Onde é que são as minhas naves? E before não estão aqui, eu já não tenho. Okay. Ficava sério. Desses que as minhas naves. E o filhote. Espera aí, mano. Vais levar com um soco na cara. Summon Infinite Shield. Parallax. Eu acho piada esta nave. Oi, está aqui? O jogo considera logo esta a minha nave. Eu curto para caralho a Infinite Shield. Mas a minha nave é a minha nave. You know what I mean? You guys understand what I mean? É tipo mãe é mãe, mano. É uma cena muito boa, não é? 3 waiting rooms, ok. Waiting room. Activated copper. I can get that. 75? I can get that shit. Come on, man, that's easy.
Estás a ouvir Conjunto Corona.
Activated copper. How do I do that? I know that I can do that. I need copper. No, how do you get activated? Deixa de ser palhaço. How do I get it? Catalog. Detected in this system. Mas tem maneira de se fazer. Chromatic metal generated by fusion in the heart of the
no meu mic da gante, não acredito em elefantes. Tu não te mandes, se não mandas a detalhes importantes. Não abrantes, não abrantes. Eu tenho brancos, para as tuas mãos sem que desanques. Nenhuma ideia quando fumo duas blanches. Com filtros em S dos teus andantes. É só armantes.
É mesmo assim, só armantes. Em antes. Pila radiante, claro. Eles agora não... O quê? Os chips agora não aparecem? Tenho que chamar uma de cada vez? Eu prefiro... Eu gostava mais que era antes, vê-las todas ao mesmo tempo. Não era bem mais cool? Cuidado, vais levar com um sobrolho. What does that even mean? What does anything mean?
Chino no olho, José Cid, 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 chino no olho.
Is this a yellow system?
E agora vou partilhar com vocês
I don't even know what type of system this
um
is.
tema que eu compus há não
Super Mario Galaxy.
que é um pouco o reflexo deste álbum que foi feito segundo uma filosofia muito simples. 2 músicos, 4 mãos, um disco.
Eu digo-te o disco. Espera aí, eu consigo ver discoveries. Copper, copper, copper. Does having copper mean that it has activated copper? This is a yellow one. That's probably activated copper on every single planeto. O que é que acham? Vai como é que chama aquilo? Frito frequência. Extreme weather.
Só dizes que é mau, depois disto nem chus nem mus. Chico, tu nem gostas de cuscuz. Isto é clássico como acordes do ranqueau. Então desliza, desliza, desliza. Eu passo o visa, o visa, o visa.
Isto parece copper deposit.
Trago sempre as melhores peles. Meio crocodilo, crocodilo e meio já nem
É mesmo assim, ó chavalo. Tem cuidado se não levas um estalo. Tem cuidado, eu quero comer um robalo.
Mas sem buço, só com pele de crocodilo. Esmiuça, esmiuça, mas não fazes caramuça. Venho de carapuço.
Isto é urânio.
O filé mignon produz pediga a todos.
Ei, ó mano.
Cimo de fila da batalha ao longo. Tu não dizes quem é. Tu não dizes, tu não dizes, tu não dizes quem é. Vai acima, vai abaixo, vai acima, vai abaixo.
Foda-se, tem mesmo voz de minigona. O gajo tem para aí 1,5 m e está tipo, ó chaval, olha o dinheiro, mano.
Tu não dizes quem é. Vai acima, vai abaixo, vai acima, vai abaixo. Fuma bebe desde que eu relaxo.
Eu sou o Michael, foda-se, já sabias, nem dizias. Rappers trocam wipe, 5 mics por 5 likes em fotografias. E tu dirias que eu não sou do rap, segue-me no Snap Boy. Eu sou da internet, como o Nuno Dias. Conduzias com essa face um bocado drug, com place cheio de fumo como o backstage.
What does that even mean?
E por falar em placements em kebab é notável como esta pita faz grão de bico com swag do falafel. Lá vou eu de rapel, a descer da corda e como tenho um parafuso a mais, eu só troco porcas. Olha uma nova, com a mão cheia de anéis, mana anda cá. Desde de chapéu andas aos papéis com o Panamá. Vais a verdade, dá-me uma de Holanda.
Urânio é bué da fixe, mano.
Não venhas contra o prof, porque isso também é bom para mim. Ei Andy, não brinques comigo, ele tira da pele e nada em lágrimas de crocodilos dandy for real.
Crocodilos dandy? Wow. Why would you?
Vai acima, vai abaixo, vai acima, vai abaixo. Fuma bebe desde que eu relaxo. Tu não dizes quem é. Tu não dizes, tu não dizes, tu não dizes quem é. Frágil. Já nem consigo ser ágil.
Queres molho?
Estou num ponto sem caramelo, repousado e café cheio. O gajo que veio ao cheiro só com pança sem dinheiro. Ele nunca traz papel.
Oi, oh filha da... Viste o que é que aconteceu? Não viste? Ia buscar um item e esta merda deu-lhe um pontapé e destruiu. Pá, obrigado, I guess. Filho da puta do Minotauro.
Vou rastejar até me segurar em pé. Não há lágrimas que sobrem a este chacaré.
É de mim ou coisa que eu queria também desapareceu?
E achas que com os 3 consegues?
Consigo, mas olha, eu estou muito cansada.
Está da frente, pá, já nem te quero ver, estou chateado contigo, mano. Silver Deposit? That's pretty important. Espero que ele não me esmague o Silver Deposit também. Oh, não consigo. Anyway, não me digas, o gajo deu um pontapé no Silver Deposit também. Nem sei quantos silvers é que eu vou arranjar, mas convém que sejam muitos. Isto é mesmo música para chilar, meu, para estar no bar a falar de merdas. Is there like a radiation storm or some shit? Que isso dava jeito para aparecer Activated Copper? Acho eu. É a minha diarrhea. É a minha diarrhea. Conjunto coruana, me vais levar com coisas na coana. Não passas de uma mamona. Mamona na coana. És uma grandíssima lamisguana. Tanto copre, mas eu quero o copre ativado.
Tempero da Índia, comércio da Síria, pó na Cisjordânia, bomba na Ucrânia. Tempero da Índia, comércio da Síria, pó na Cisjordânia, bomba na Ucrânia. Adoro o Januário, tem dentes de canário, não sou nenhum otário.
Espero que estes gajos não dêem
Compro o meu horário.
um pontapé
A
no,
culpa é
na
de China,
technology.
quebra na rotina, Portugal é uma mina. E o fado é desculpa, por falta de escuta, Portugal é uma puta. Man diz que isto significa, man diz que isto significa, man diz que isto significa, man diz que isto significa. E a culpa é do China, por quebra na rotina, Portugal é uma mina. E o fado é desculpa, por falta de escuta, Portugal é uma puta. Tempero da Índia, comércio da Síria, pó na Cisjordânia, bomba na Ucrânia. Tempero da Índia, comércio da Síria, pó na Cisjordânia, bomba na Ucrânia.
Pá, meti a dar uma cena de... Como é que se chama aquilo? Esqueci-me do nome. Conjunto corante.
Tempero da Índia.
Olha, o chão não parte, mano. don't die. Não, dá-me. Oh, pois.
Relógio desperta, são 8 da matina.
Como é que será que anda o fuse hoje em dia?
Gasolina em fila indiana, eles caminham para a chacina. Há uma cortina de fumo que cobre a selva de betão. Rebenta com sonhos como bolhas de sabão. É inútil desistir de caminhar em contramão. A cidade é uma garganta funda sem pescoço. Engole executivos logo ao pequeno almoço. Vai devorando vidas, é um ritmo já. É a ninfa que seduz, jogos em contraluz.
O quê?
No fim, a
Ei,
cobra
desculpa,
fuma,
eu tenho
leva
ideia que disse
o
alguma
fumo,
coisa realmente, mas já não me lembro.
Está pronta para mais uma.
Ai, ai. Ai, eu não vou encontrar aqui. You know what? Peraí. Discoveries. Qual é o planeta com mais... Weather, corrosive cyclones. Parece-me bem. Rotting planet, humid planet, boiling planet. Bora para o Nobi, whatever. Nobi 19.
Eu vou a fundo da questão, embora não saiba a questão. Minha mão não desce mais, minha mão não desce mais.
Isto é onde eu
Então
estou.
lá dentro que lhe senti os sinais, já fumei. Esta gaja não é brega.
Este weather é capaz de não ser mau, costuma estar stormy.
Afinal quem é que emprega? Afinal quem
Pá,
é que
naftalina.
emprega no serviço de entrega? Estou no controle e ela cega. Seu juízo o que é que alega?
Calega? Mas o cabaré, tipo... É pena, porque um gajo já viu as meninas todas e tal. Jesus, tem mesmo gunas do Porto. Para o Porto. E depois o pessoal do Porto está tipo... E oh mano, eles falaram do meu bairro. Kimishima 2? Epá. Tens que dar... Tem que dar uma pausa nos anitos.
Mais um ainda me grego, tola de lé. Afinal quem é que entrega? Afinal quem é que entrega? Tola de lé. Sem controle ainda fui pé. Seu juízo o que é que é? Amial. Francos. Lapa. Sanchens. Fontainhas.
Solanium? Ok. Então sou capaz de conseguir encontrar os tais Activated Coppers. Beão, beão, beão. Beão, beão, beão. Ah, com licença. Os minigunas.
Eu não sou mau filho, tu põe-te fino. Só vou levar o teu de fininho. E para aquecer a noite na... Ah, não é que há, não entra aqui, entra agora. Tu estás que tão, Nino. Eu não não sou mau filho, tu põe-te fino. Só vou levar o teu de fininho. E para aquecer a noite de Natal tenho vinho. Duas pantufas rotas, minha mão não coça, então corre. Antes que tu cozas, não tenho nada e quero coisas.
Eu lembro de ter mais
Sem ser água de lavar o bacalhau, tô
terra.
no olho nesta noite de Natal. Já vi o saco ao santo, eu tenho o olho, tu não és mau. Vi ela da cadeia, lampião, só que pau. Não tinhas népia, mas ficaste cor de sépia. Voltei para minha casa na miséria, gente séria. Hashtag gente séria, o tinto e a lata da Minerva. Ainda há gente que se enerva, lista de espera. Tenho um percebe só pequenino, tenho um percebe só pequenino. Jesus.
O gajo parte o chão todo, já percebi.
A gente já nem come bacalhau. A gente já nem come bacalhau, mãe. A gente já nem come bacalhau. Ainda perguntas porque é que a minha gente está que tal. A gente já nem come bacalhau. A gente já nem come bacalhau, mãe. A gente já nem come bacalhau. Ainda perguntas porque é que a minha gente está que tal.
Ao fundo vejo os neons a brilhar. Tua boneca deu-me o número, eu vou-lhe ligar. Tô na preliminar a bacalhar o bar. E quando o gordo entrar, o porco virá adulto no teu lar. Abusa do peru enquanto a blusa lhe dá outro ar. E eu por outro lado não estou lá para te avisar. É Natal, brindemos à liberdade. Brinquedos da puberdade fazem
Chlorine.
Estou a laifar e se ficar não há como que cresça. A criança quer um peluche, um perfume da
That's where you get chlorine?
Foi à pesca e não há bacalhau que sobra. A gente é pobre, mas come próprio cobra. Esta escumalha é do pior, bro. Farrapo velhos e mudo vila dá-te cortes na vilha dread. Avisa ao INEM que nem o Pai Natal nos salva. Meia branca numa meia-noite calma. Base. Ainda perguntas porque é que a minha gente tá de cal.
Tá com down, nigga.
E se eu fosse para o outro lado do planeta? Parece ser mais land aqui.
Sacados por todos os lados, abanem o traseiro ao som verdadeiro. Putas, levantem as batutas, proxenetas, deixem-se de tretas. Sacados por todos os lados, abanem o traseiro ao som do verdadeiro. Baby Jesus don't cry.
What is up, Aleph Alert Nation? How you doing, man? Como é que está esse dia? Selenium. Acho que tem mesmo que esperar. Que haja uma storm, ou caralho. Não tens para Shaman para isto? Como assim? What does that mean? Nice to be king.
Hey,
Effigy.
baby. Por aqui, por cima de vila? O quê? Um emprego? Não. Tu ainda és muito novinha. Tenta no McDonald's ou num call center. Até teres 18 aninhos. Fofa.
Indium. It's worth a lot, right? Not real.
Mamãe, eu não quero mais fluidos vaginais, minadas orientais liberais. O homem do perdão por pagar ao patrão da filha da mãe. Tão nova e eu bato-lhe. Primeiro tabefe e eu amo. Primeira no F. Isso de drogas e legumes para te esquecer do S, do S com 2 gumes, não de perfumes. E tantas filhas em casa, tão novas e minadas e tantas filhas em casa, tão novas e minadas e tantas filhas em casa, tão novas e minadas e tantas filhas em casa. Se aqui te gusta, se aqui te gusta. Mamãe, eu não quero mais fluidos vaginais. Mamãe, eu não quero.
Tenho que esperar que chove. O tal da Índia. Is that real? Is that real? Estou farto de estar neste planeta.
Las Vegas Festival. Olá.
Bota shake para barbucha, maninha.
Muito bem, tu agora estás um senhor. Estava lá o envelope.
Sabem o que é que eu não gosto? Tomar banho e começar logo a suar. Isso é que eu não gosto. Isso é que temos que parar. Eu não gosto de nada, Aleph. Não gosto de nada. Tu deixa-me. Deixa-me em paz. Mas estás bom? Como é que foi o teu dia? Man, tudo com uma soneira, mano. Vou dar a volta. Ui. Fell right? Nice. That's based. And I left build. Camouflage. Ai, dói-me o rabo. Acho que está na hora de meter um supositório. Estou a brincar. Acho que esta cadeira não é muito boa.
pam pum, cada bala mata um. Lá em cima na Trindade tem um pavão com veneno. Quem fumou morreu. Quem fumou morreu. Então, queres um motivo, não faz. Quero um cigarro, rapaz. Está muita gente lá atrás, não sou capaz. Queres um motivo, então vem. Quero um diabo no bem. Está muita gente a 100, não sou ninguém. Pim pam pum, cada bala mata um. Lá embaixo esse ambiente tem um pavão com veneno. Quem fumou morreu. Quem fumou morreu. Então, queres um motivo, não faz. Quero um cigarro, rapaz.
What am I
Está muita
watching?
gente lá atrás, não sou capaz.
Vou levantar um bocadinho.
Queres um motivo, então vem. Quero um diabo no bem. Está muita gente a 100, não sou ninguém. Sambiente à Trindade, Trindade Sambiente. De 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 Sambiente à Trindade, Trindade Sambiente.
Já acabou? Eu acho que vou ver um Star Trek. Acho que vou ver um Star Trek e bazar. Fazer um chill X. Estou a morrer. Ai ai. Manda para os DMs, meu, que eu agora vou dormir. Durmam bem, obrigado pela companhia, as usual, always awesome. Beijinhos, beijolas, cuidado com as pilolas. Bye.